On a planet whose surface is 3/4 water, the mysteries of the deep have long provided potent inspiration for the active imagination. When ancient mariners drew maps of a world they had only begun to understand, they wrote over vast, unexplored oceans, "Here there be monsters." Today it seems that our entire world has been well documented by explorers or scientists, and that all our monsters have been found out. But swimming silently in the icy depths of the Arctic, there is one creature that has remained a mystery. Until now. To qualify as a monster to loom in our imagination, the shark has been more than happy to oblige. Its stealthy and toothsome biological design has made it the most feared predator of the deep. Almost all of the 465 shark species live in tropical waters, feasting on a 4-star buffet that is easy to spot coming, including the odd scientist. Only 8 are known to frequent more forbidding waters. And these have proven more difficult to study than their southern cousins. But only one still remains more legend than fact. It has never been studied in the wild, and left scientists scratching their heads for over a century. A true monster.
John Steinbeck wrote that an ocean without unnamed monsters would be like a completely dreamless sleep. And somewhere in the human psyche, I think we need monsters, undescribed things. They are not necessarily scary, but they're undescribed and mysterious. That's really what a monster is. And I think in my psyche, that was what the Greenland shark was.
The Greenland shark. It is the largest Arctic fish and one of the world's largest sharks. At over 20 feet in length and weighing in at more than a ton, it rivals the stature of the fearsome great white. But unlike all shark species, the Greenland shark remains a great unknown, fueling the imaginations of scientists worldwide. Many have traveled north to study the secret life of this mysterious shark. But so far, only dead specimens washed up on a beach or snared in a net have been found. And no one has ever filmed a Greenland shark swimming freely in the wild. Ever. For Dr. Chris Harvey-Clark, a marine biologist at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, sharks have loomed large in his imagination since childhood.
I think it would probably have to be Christmas morning about 1970, unwrapping a parcel that had a book about sharks in it and reading about that. But that focused an interest that had come from my father, who swam with sharks all his childhood.
Dr. Clark's early fascination with sharks would ultimately become a lifelong passion. But there was one shark in particular that swam the strongest in his dreams.
The first time I ever saw a Greenland shark, I guess I was about 12 years old, living in Ottawa. It was in the Ottawa Citizen newspaper. It was a picture of a fellow with a toque and a parka on, who sitting beside an ice fishing hole with 2 sharks laid out on the ice beside him.
This fisherman's tale didn't make the front page because of a slow news day, but its unlikely location. These sharks had been caught far from their Arctic home, hauled through the ice on a frozen river in Quebec called the Saginay. The Saginay is a tributary of the Great St. Lawrence River, the most important shipping channel in North America. With breathtaking cliffs and a unique marine ecosystem, it is one of the few inland fjords in the world. Greenland sharks were thought to frequent only the Arctic waters near their namesake island. Yet the Saginay is almost 3,000 kilometers and a sharp left turn from home. For over 20 years, this unusual shark story continued to intrigue Chris Harvey Clark. What were they doing so far from home? His attempts at finding an answer remained as elusive as the shark itself.
Looking for Greenland sharks in Canada has been like looking for Bigfoot. It's a bit like cryptozoology in that we started with nothing. There was really no literature on these animals.
In fact, all that did seem to exist in this remote, isolated region on the north shore of the St. Lawrence were local stories of shark encounters, and these had never been translated for the benefit of the English-speaking world. But in 1996, Chris got lucky. He met another shark expert who knew the area well, yet he too had never heard the stories about the Greenland shark.
I guess it all started when I met Chris at a dive conference in Nova Scotia. Chris mentioned this story about when he was a kid, having read an article about sharks having been fished in the Saginay Fjord through the ice. And when we started talking about this, he says, "Why don't you investigate this story?"
Jeff Guélan is a professor and professional diver from Drummondville, Quebec. His passion for sharks has taken him around the world, including a Cousteau research expedition.
One of the most interesting things in regards to the Greenland shark is that so little is known about it. The other thing is, relatively speaking, it's in my backyard. And to have such a big animal still be such a mystery in 2003 is just something I had to work on.
Now Jeff too was hooked on the mystery of the Saginay sharks. And because he spoke French, he became the perfect sleuth to conduct some old-fashioned detective work.
Et pour ce qui est des poissons comme le requin du Groenland, lui, j'en ai entendu parler, je l'ai vu dans les journaux. Je sais que dans le milieu des années 90, vers 96, on a attrapé un requin qui mesurait à peu près 4 mètres à la baie, dans la baie des AA.
A voyage up the majestic Saginay Fjord is a journey into the heart of French Canada.
They're doing things that we didn't think they'd do. They can move fast.
For 500 years, the Saginay has been home to a unique culture of farmers and fishers, and for those willing to ask, its very own monster. The St. Lawrence River, first explored by Jacques Cartier in 1535, appears more like a vast inland sea. Ships lost in its unpredictable swells, maidens abandoned on remote islands, and epic battles fought on its shores. The Fleuve Saint Laurent is home to a host of legends, some still alive and well just below its surface. In summer, 19 marine mammals, including minke, beluga, and humpback whales, also call these waters home. And where the Saginay River meets the St. Lawrence is one of the best whale-watching destinations in the world.
What do you think, Captain? Is that a small fin or is that a minke?
But while these gentle giants thrill thousands of tourists, they offer only a glimpse of the unique underwater universe they inhabit, a world they share with another, more mysterious giant.
The Greenland shark's environment is just a fascinating environment. It's alive There is life just hanging on to everything.
Here, two unique marine worlds collide, creating an amazing explosion of life and color. From the Atlantic, the tides deliver cold salt water, carrying nutrient-rich plankton and swarms of krill. These support a dynamic food chain, ranging from anemones and sea peaches, wolffish and capelin, to some of the world's biggest ocean dwellers. The Saginay Fjord itself was formed during the last Great Ice Age, when retreating glaciers left behind a deep scar carved into the Laurentian Mountains. Its cliffs soar 400 meters high and mirror a riverbed of almost the same depth. In the fjord, salt water flowing in from the St. Lawrence meets freshwater runoff from the interior. Different temperatures and salinity means the waters don't mix. The colder, denser salt water slips under the warmer freshwater, and in the process, creates a submerged high-rise of biodiversity. The Greenland shark might be attracted here for the same reason as the whales: food, and lots of it.
These are animals that eat up and down the food chain. They'll eat marine mammal blubber, top of the food chain. They'll eat sedentary invertebrates on the bottom, and everything in between.
Chris was sure that Greenland sharks lurked in the fjord, but he was short on scientific evidence. That all changed when he and his partner, Jeff Gallant, began their grassroots investigation.
I started driving around the Saguenay, speaking to fishers, people at the Fjord Museum, anyone that I would see at the dock just fishing with a normal fishing line. I'd come up and go see him and say, "What do you know about sharks?" And people came up with all these amazing stories and photos, and that's how the investigative part all started out about 5 years ago. Vous êtes monsieur?
Steven Green.
Steven, bonjour. Jeffrey Gallant.
Chris Harvey Clark. Bonjour.
It was the beginning of a unique journey. A mysterious Arctic fish had become a local legend. But until Chris and Jeff came along, no one had ever asked why or where.
Vous étiez capitaine?
Moi, j'avais un chalutier à 60 pieds. On pêchait la crevette. J'ai attrapé un requin de ce genre-là.
C'est la même...
Soon enough, they discovered that as long as there had been a Quebec, there had been stories about sharks. The first was about a 16th century sailor whose leg was bitten off in a shark attack while swimming in the St. Lawrence. Pulled from the water, he bled to death on the deck of his ship.
Je crois que les gens du Saguenay adorent leurs requins.
I think the people of the Saguenay love their shark. It has almost become a mythical creature, a mascot of sorts for the people. The Greenland shark may be our own Loch Ness monster here in the Saguenay.
Here it seemed that the Greenland shark was nothing short of a celebrity. But for Jeff and Chris,
I want to see this.
it was the modern stories that really captured their attention.
Okay, you've got me hooked like the shark. I want to see this head now.
It's a part of it because the guys there, they didn't took complete.
Padu de la Durante's catch ended up on his kitchen wall.
Now this is the actual, this isn't a cast. It feels to me like they used the actual skin
This
from
is
the
the
head.
real.
This
That's
is
the
the
real
real
skin.
thing.
That's the one.
Yeah.
He's right there, and those teeth. That's the teeth of it.
And they're still pretty darn sharp.
Yeah.
So the holding teeth on the top, the cutting teeth on
and
the
the cutting
bottom.
teeth on the top like
Yeah.
that. When he bite, he cut, and there he goes.
I've seen pictures of whales that have been bitten by these,
Yeah.
and it's like an ice cream scoop, and a big shark will take a 10 or 12 pound, perfect, like a
And
bowl.
he just bite and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
cut.
Evidence of sharks in the Saguenay was everywhere. It just didn't exist in scientific journals.
Almost symmetrical.
But around dinner tables or over a bière forte at the local bar, it was becoming obvious that the Greenland shark was a respected member of the local community.
It's the king because it's not easy to catch, and it deserves a place of honor. I think it's chosen the most beautiful place in Canada, maybe even the world.
Okay. Puis vous en avez pris en même temps?
We caught the shark at night. We checked on our lines when we got there. It was heavy, so we figured we had some cod. It was caught on 3 of our lines, so we pulled and pulled, and there it was, all twisted up.
Yeah, that's the giant one. Yeah, I remember this one. This is impressive.
Now it was up to Chris and Jeff to turn legends and lore into scientific fact. And if they were ever going to study this shark in the flesh, they would have to dive into its world. It was time to mount an expedition. So far, the evidence they had gathered indicated a certain time of year that Greenland sharks like to spend in the Saguenay, the dead of winter. When the cold winds blow into Quebec's Saginay Fjord, a new world is born. It's a bleak, frozen landscape. But winter is prime-time fishing season here, and so it seems, for catching sharks. In the past 40 years, dozens had been reeled in by unsuspecting fishers. Aurélien Gagné got his big surprise in 1995 and captured the entire event on his video camera.
Listen, when the shark came up the hole and I saw the tip of its nose, I sure jumped. I wasn't scared, but I always have a grapnel beside me. I grabbed it with the grapnel to take it out. We widened the hole. My friends had to come over and help me.
For shark researchers Jeff Gallant and Chris Harvey-Clark, it was more convincing proof.
So far from being extremely rare, they are around. The second thing was to go and actually look for a likely location, and that location was at the head of the Saginay Fjord at La Baie, huge ice fishing camp. There were probably 1,000 huts. And in 1996, anyway, we knew that I believe 5 sharks had been caught there, and over the years, almost every year, a shark or 2.
And it was here that Jeff and Chris decided to mount their expedition. They called it Operation Skalukskoak, the Inuit name for the Greenland shark. Surrounded by fishing huts, the team sought a hole in the ice 2 feet thick and hoped for some good old-fashioned luck.
These areas here on the map are where they caught the Greenland shark. So they would have caught 2 at this fishing camp. Likely 1 in the first.
But the fjord's physical landscape, a haven for the deep-water Greenland shark, was a big problem. Diving in these cold, murky waters would be like looking for a needle in a haystack.
If you had a 4-meter predator crossing your lawn in urban Toronto, you'd sure know about it, so would everybody else, but things under the water are invisible, so people don't know they're there.
To find this shark, known as the giant swimming nose, the team had planned for any possible encounter.
We've got literally 100-pound blocks of meat on the bottom in wire cages. We made these big wire burritos.
And then tonight, when we put more in, we'll actually have the blood balls. We'll add the blood balls to it. We've got 2 doors on each side. The doors are large enough for a diver to be able to swim through with his tank on. If a shark does show up, the shark is very bashful at first. So we thought that we could probably manage to get close to the shark without using the cage at first.
The team's arrival on the ice had drawn a lot of attention from both the media and the local community. Most thought that Chris and Jeff were crazy to dive in these extreme conditions.
People thought we were nuts to dive under the ice in the wintertime. But the reason we were there is because this shark is only known to come up near the surface in the wintertime when the surface water is colder than the bottom water. And since the shark is a shark that will normally be found at 1,000 feet and deeper, there's no way we can reach that depth on scuba gear.
So the diving conditions were extreme. The environmental conditions were extreme. The weather was terrible. I mean, it was sunny, but it was extremely cold, minus 30, minus 40. Equipment would freeze, plastic would just shatter. Regulators, your diving regulators would freeze open underwater, and you lose your air supply in a couple of minutes. It was difficult diving, difficult situation.
You had all these factors. You had the ice, you had current under the ice, total darkness, only one way out. But we did this according to scientific diving safety standards. The team was very experienced.
Experience and safe diving protocols would protect the divers from the elements. But what if they did meet their monster? In this environment, no one knew what to expect.
Our lights would light up all of the big boulders on the bottom, and then the shadows of these rocks would move around as we're looking in different directions, and each rock looked like it could have been a Greenland shark.
I don't want to go down, I don't want to stand.
For days, the team explored this harsh, dark world. But instead of answers, only new questions surface with the divers.
The sort of questions that a kid might ask you about the biology of these animals. Where does it go? What does it eat? How does it reproduce? How big does it get? How old is it? Can't answer them. I mean, these animals are really virtually undescribed and unknown in science, and I think that's a real challenge.
Operation Skalookskawak revealed a lot about the Saginay ecosystem. But why the Greenland shark had never been studied in the wild before was becoming obvious. Diving here in the winter was just as tough as diving in the Arctic. And as the untouched bait stations proved, results were impossible to guarantee.
At the end of the Skalookskawak expedition, we felt whacked, basically. We were physically beaten up. We were, we had bruises and cuts and frozen fingers. Our equipment was beat up. Our psyches were a bit beat up because we were very pumped. We really thought we were going to see a Greenland shark, and we didn't.
Themselves. Yep. They go in and rip a piece of flesh off and bugger off.
Jeffrey, what's next? I'm talking big picture here,
Jeff.
Jeff.
Big picture. Okay. I'm still in the expedition.
Would you come back next year?
Yes, I would, but only if we didn't have to take care of all the logistics again, like the generator, the tent, and all that stuff. That took a lot of our time.
Jeff and Chris remained convinced that they could find the Greenland shark. And the next winter, they were back. Even though Skalookskawak too had to face the same tough challenges. The team was now attracting national attention, and even more stories of local shark encounters. But under the ice, it was still nowhere to be found. Now Chris and Jeff faced a classic scientific enigma. How do you find an animal whose very nature makes it almost impossible to study in the wild?
Now, when you're up to 2 strikes, and you know that maybe you'll have another chance at this, and if it doesn't work, then you're through. I had to come up with something with much better chances of actually seeing the animal. Like 1 chance out of 10 is just not going to cut it for another expedition.
Frozen, frustrated, and out of money, it was back to the drawing board. Would they get another chance? Only time would tell. For now, Jeff and Chris were going home. years, Jeff Guillaume and Chris Harvey-Clark had been hunting for Greenland sharks in the Saginay Fjord of Quebec with no success.
If you talk to my family and friends, they'll tell you that this Greenland shark thing I have is an obsession. My social life has taken a beating from this. To dive with this animal is something that very, very few people have done in the world. Very few people are studying the animal, and I'm just not going to give up.
2 tough winter expeditions had ended in failure. But both Jeff and Chris still believed that somewhere out there, their monster still lurked in the depths of the Saginay.
We just got all kinds of anecdotal information that we would never have otherwise had that further confirmed the conviction. These sharks are here. We just have to persist and we'll find them.
The 2 explorers had local assistance, experience, and scientific logic on their side. Everything, it seemed, except luck. But then, the unexpected happened.
Just out of nowhere, a few months later, I get this email from someone in Baie-Comeau that says that he had observed a large fish. So immediately I phoned Chris.
And Jeffrey says, listen, Chris, I've been monitoring an electronic bulletin board. I've gotten some information. Some divers in Baie-Comeau are seeing some very big fish. They think they're seeing sharks.
Chris says, why aren't you already on the road to Baie-Comeau?
Well, one of the things that you have to be prepared to do when a serendipitous event comes along is you have to act and act fast.
Which is exactly what Jeff did. And within hours, he was speeding north. The town of Baie-Comeau is located on the north shore of the St. Lawrence, 300 kilometers northeast from the mouth of the Saguenay. Here, Jeff met up with local divers Sylvain Sirois and Alain Simard. Both claim to have had a recent encounter with a Greenland shark.
When we see it, we say it's a fish, it's a big fish, and we are surprised to meet this guy underwater, but we are more surprised to see how big it can be, all the story and the team of scientists. It's very big, way bigger than we think.
Okay.
But what was Sylvain's big fish? In the blink of an eye, new hope and a new search for the Greenland shark had begun.
For someone to see one on just the one dive, which just wasn't enough to actually set up an expedition and go. This was probably just a fluke encounter. But then when I get this other email from Alain 4 days later, who says he saw potentially the same or different sharks on 3 consecutive dives on the same day, which means that those animals were there probably for the entire week. So why wouldn't they be there now? And that's why we just took off and went for it.
Sylvain and Alain take Jeff to the location where they had both seen the sharks, a secluded bay only minutes up the coast from Baie-Comeau.
Tu l'as vu 3 fois?
Ce requin-là, je l'ai vu 2 fois.
2 fois? L'animal, il faisait quoi?
Il nageait bien tranquillement. C'est comme s'il est venu voir qu'est-ce que j'étais, là.
Okay.
Puis il a vu que j'étais pas, d'après moi, j'étais pas dans son répertoire de manger, ça fait que...
2 sightings at almost the same time in the same place was promising information. But Jeff still wasn't sure. The problem was, the Greenland shark shouldn't be here, swimming in shallow water on a warm June day. Except that this had not been a typical summer. Spring had arrived late, and the water temperature was still unseasonably cold. There was also an unusually large run of bait fish congregating in the bay, both good reasons for the Greenland shark to be here. As Jeff prepared to dive, Chris was still traveling north from Halifax.
The drive to Baie-Comeau, which is about 8 hours and then a couple hours on the ferry, it was sheer torture. I was very excited. I thought maybe this is it. Finally, we've been looking for 5 years. Maybe we finally struck gold.
But at the dive site, Jeff decided he couldn't wait any longer. The sharks Alain and Sylvain observed might already be long gone. After a 5-year search, the anticipation is overwhelming.
The whole time I was just thinking, this might be it. This might be finally the moment where I see this animal, and then I'm not just some cuckoo looking for this magic shark that doesn't exist. Within 2 minutes, Alain tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around, looked at him. He's pointing off to our right. And then I see this massive thing just come out of nowhere, coming straight for us. Part of me just couldn't believe it was a shark. It was probably something else. We don't have to swim to it. It's just coming to us. It's looking at us. It was the Greenland shark.
For 5 years, Jeff Guillen had been on a quest, hunting for the Greenland shark. Now, only minutes after diving into the St. Lawrence River near Baie-Comeau, Quebec, Jeff and local divers Alain Simard and Sylvain Serrois had come face to face with this elusive predator.
Immediately, my heart just started to pump like never before. I was breathing air like a newbie on scuba. I just couldn't believe it. It's like watching TV and you've got your lottery ticket number and each number is coming up one after the other, but it just happened. It was like the 6 numbers at once. Boom.
Following the slow-moving 4-meter female, Jeff captured the first pictures ever recorded of a Greenland shark swimming freely in the wild. It was a scientific coup and a personal victory.
So many things were going on at the same time. I mean, it was personal satisfaction, it was validation, it was this huge rock off my shoulders. And I was just so hoping that Chris would be there on the next dive to be able to see this too, because we've really been into this, both of us, since the beginning, and it would have been so unfair for just me to see it. So at the same time, I was really ecstatic about seeing it. I was thinking about my friend.
Finally, Chris had arrived, and at first light, he and Jeff speed to the dive site. Both are anxious, hoping that the Greenland shark is still there.
According to Sylvain, anyway, the Capelin run is exceptionally good this year. You know, we're getting this assemblage of predators, seals, whales, and maybe sharks in the same location, probably all feeding on a common food source, I would think.
And just like Jeff's first encounter, a shark seeks out the divers only meters from the dock.
Within 2 or 3 minutes, we encountered our first shark. When I first saw the shark emerging out of the gloom, I mean, your heart's pumping, not out of fear, out of sheer excitement.
Now Chris, too, had finally come face to face with the monster of his childhood dreams.
It's like finally you've seen Bigfoot. You've found, you know, the secret graveyard of the elephants. You've found the thing you've looked for years. It's very exciting.
But despite the thrill of their encounter, both divers knew they had a job to do.
In terms of how you feel when you see something like this, there's this tug-of-war going on inside you. One side of you is, you know, primal. It's like, holy cow, this is a huge animal. You have no idea how it's going to behave when you get close to it. Is it going to turn around and take a piece out of you, or is it going to keep going? You know, I don't want to hurt it. I don't want to push its buttons. I want to spend as much time observing it as possible. You know that this may be the only chance in your life you have. You may only have a couple of minutes, and you'll never see this animal again.
This shark is a 2.5 meter male and moves a lot faster than the female Jeff filmed the day before. It swims in a converging course with the divers and changes direction only at the last moment while keeping a sharp eye on these strange intruders. But a sharp eye isn't what they expected. almost all of the Greenland sharks captured in the Arctic were found to have an obvious handicap.
We went into this thinking that these are the giant blind swimming nose model of shark. As long as you get out of the way, you're probably okay. They're slow moving. They're not visual predators. All wrong.
In the past, it was thought that most Greenland sharks were virtually blind, robbed of their eyesight by a parasitic creature called a copepod, which forced the sharks to rely on their noses for dinner. But these sharks had clear eyes, free of parasites, and didn't behave at all like lumbering, blind scavengers.
We found the sharks were very highly maneuverable. They can snap turn on a dime like that. We also found that the sharks basically, when they want to get away from you, they do. They just turn and they book. They take right off and they head for deep water, and we clock them up to 1.4 meters per second, which is faster than a diver can swim. So these sharks are, I think, capable predators.
Chris and Jeff studied the male closely, but the excitement of swimming with Greenland sharks for the very first time had drained their air tanks. They began to surface when suddenly they got another big surprise.
We're tracking the shark and the gauge is going down, and then we see another shark coming in. And I'm out of air. I have to go up. It was the most heartbreaking moment of my diving career when that happened.
After years of frustration, Chris and Jeff could hardly believe their luck, coming face to face with so many sharks in one place at one time.
Hey, incredible, man. We did it. Right on, buddy. Lovely to see you. That was about 2 animals.
But they also knew that success was fleeting. It was time to fill their tanks and get ready for another dive. June 2003 in Baie-Comeau, Quebec. Chris Harvey Clark and Jeff Guillaume are making the most of their incredible encounter with Greenland sharks, with 3 contacts in less than 24 hours.
30 feet.
And after 5 frustrating years, they've succeeded in filming them in the wild for the very first time.
I know, it's like an ideal situation. I thought we'd have to go really deep to see these animals. I thought we'd be looking at, 150 feet or something to see them. Find them in 50 or 60 feet is fantastic.
I remember expecting to see it every time now, which is totally contrary to what it was before. On the other dives, never expecting to see anything really. And on these dives, I know I'm going to see him. You're out sitting on the dock having a sandwich, and then we look at the time and say, okay, it's time to go, jump in, and boom, there it is again. And that was just totally incredible.
Now on their 3rd dive, they meet a new 3-meter female. Just like the others, she glides out of the gloom, curious, it seems, to check the divers out.
It was hard to get up close to it. Actually, at one point, when I figured I had enough, I went back over it again, and I just had to touch it, which is really not something I recommend to anyone to do, but I'd just been looking for it for so long, I had to touch it to see if it was real on a personal level.
Although not as aggressive as the male, this female lets the divers know through her body language exactly how close is too close. Depressing her pectoral fins and angling her nose downward, she exhibits the classic defensive posturing of most other shark species.
What it's doing is it's the animal telling you, I don't like your proximity or the way you're behaving, back off.
And I wonder why it would do that, because the Greenland shark has no predator. The only predator it might have is other Greenland sharks, because they will eat each other. And to see the shark do that, and it just naturally did it right away, was surprising.
We noticed some things that the sharks really didn't like. They disliked having you in the 6 o'clock position directly behind them. And this, I've dived with many other species of sharks. This seems to be a pretty consistent shark trait. They do not like you there.
And like other sharks, this female has a scarred and frayed tail. Scars that could have resulted from tail nipping during courtship, a behavior science knows nothing about. And getting up close and personal with the male shark revealed it was missing one of its 2 sex organs. An indication that the mysterious sex life of the Greenland shark could also be a bit wild. At the beginning of each dive, Jeff and Chris try not to linger near the surface too long. With the bright sun overhead, a diver's silhouette looks a lot like a seal. At this site just a few days ago, local divers had a nerve-wracking shark encounter.
The sharks we saw were in the sort of 3-meter range. Other divers in the area had seen one about 5 meters long. That's getting pretty big. When you're that big, they call you mister.
On the way back up to the surface, one of the sharks actually left the bottom and stalked him all the way to the surface.
The real tension with Greenland sharks is we know nothing about them. So is this animal a scavenger or is it a predator? Are we a meal or are we a competitor?
But no sharks are found near the wreck of this old fishing boat, so Jeff and Chris return to the bay. And here, on their next dive, another large female emerges from the shadows behind them.
They were aware of our presence way before we knew they were there, and yet they still came to check us out. So you could say in a way they're curious. Maybe it's because they normally just rule this domain without any interference from anyone else.
In some cases, they would circle back like that, come around behind you, and you'd be doing this dance with sharks. I joked with Jeff that this was kind of like the ballet, only we didn't know what the prima ballerina was going to do at any given moment.
One thing we definitely learned through these dives is that this animal is not what we read about. Some of the things are true, but other things we can question now because of what we saw. Its feeding habits, its interaction with the environment, interactions with humans. These animals had probably never seen a human before.
Is it migratory, and if so, where does it go to? How old does it get? We do not know how old these animals are. Studies indicate that Greenland sharks grow at about 0.5 centimeter a year. So you do the math. How old is a 3 to 4 meter shark?
Is it possible that this shark is over 300 years old? If it is, it would be the oldest living vertebrate on Earth.
So there's just all these questions, more questions than when we actually jumped in the first time.
The female glides silently away from the divers. It's the last one that they would see on this expedition. Today, they still don't know if they will ever see one again. But their insatiable desire for answers guarantees they will be back.
The old 19th century model of science where you macheted your way through the jungle and found the pygmy chimpanzee colony that everybody suspected but nobody knew where it was, that doesn't happen anymore. Except it does underwater, and that's what happened to us.
Diving into the depths of our planet's last frontier, one more monster has been found out. But the mysteries of the sea continue to endure. And that's nature's guarantee to the explorer in all of us that we will never have a dreamless sleep.